Hello, thanks for joining me today. I wanted to show you how to make this really beautiful peach tart. I made it for my husband's birthday last week, and it was so easy to make compared to a cake or a pie that I thought I would type it up and put it on my blog because it's a really great thing to do with summer fruit. I'm sure you could make the same exact tart with some kind of berry or figs or almost anything that you find in the summertime. But peaches are really delicious right now, and they look really beautiful when they're arranged on the tart. So I thought that would be a nice thing to make for a birthday dessert. So let's get started with making the crust. What you're going to need is some almond flour. If you didn't have almond flour, you could take some blanched almonds or even regular almonds and blend them up in the food processor, but you'd have to grind them up for quite a while, so you'd need a strong food processor like a Cuisinart or something. But I use almond flour, 2 cups, and then some coconut sugar. I know some people are using alternative sweeteners now, like monk fruit. You might want to try, but I don't know exactly how much you'd need. So I'm using coconut sugar, about 1/4 cup, some coconut oil. You could also use butter. I've got 1/4 cup coconut oil, and then a little bit of salt and an egg. And if you want to make this vegan and don't want to put an egg in there, you can put a tablespoon of flax seed meal and then 2 tablespoons of water, and just let that sit for about 10 or 15 minutes. And that'll be your egg, your flax egg. So we're just gonna mix these up. I'm gonna actually move my ingredients off to the side. So I'm curious how everyone's doing. In Austin, we're headed towards stage 5, which is going to be another lockdown. And hope everybody's doing okay. So I usually whisk in the coconut oil or butter with the sugar and the egg. Get that nice and blended in. Could add the salt now. If you're using salted butter, you'll want to half the amount of salt. So I put that in the recipe that I'll be posting later today. Just use 1/8 teaspoon of salt if you're using salted butter, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt if you're, can't quite get that out, if you're using coconut oil. Then I think I'll switch to a wooden spoon for this part. And one of the great things about making a tart is you can actually press the dough into the pan rather than having to roll it out and refrigerate it and roll it out like you do with a pie crust. A pie crust, unless you make them all the time, I think they're really labor intensive and they're difficult to get just right. And you know, when I was growing up, people used Crisco shortening to make pie crusts, and that stuff will kill you. It's so bad. So anyway, if you want to save yourself some time and effort, you can make a tart instead of a pie. And so our dough is basically done. It's like a cookie dough. You could probably make a cookie out of this. What I did here, I've got a tart pan that has a removable bottom. You can also use kind of like a quiche pan that's ceramic, and just make sure you oil that so that you can get the pieces out later. But I like these removable ones if you can get one, because when the tart is done you can lift it out. But I usually cut a piece of parchment paper to the size of the bottom. That's really easy to do. You just kind of wrap it around and make a line, or you can trace a line with a pen and cut it out. And then you really don't even need to grease the sides. This is pretty much, it's not really non-stick, but I think it's enamel coated, and the cookie dough doesn't tend to stick to it. So you could put on some food service gloves if you don't want all this sticking to you, but I can just go wash my hands afterwards, so it's not a big deal. Now I'm going to press this into the pan. I think that I have a 10-inch tart pan. If you have a 9-inch tart pan, that would probably work even better, because you'll see that I'm going to have to flatten this out quite a bit. To flatten this out quite a bit to get to the edges. And you know, if you wanted the dough to go all the way up the edges, you'd have to make a little bit more, but you'll see when I've made this before, I think it's just about the right amount. The thing is, you want the crust to be, having trouble with my parchment paper. The thing is, you want the crust to be thick enough to hold the filling and, you know, not fall apart, but you want it to be thin enough that when you put your fork through it when you're eating it, it's not tough and hard to, you know, hard to cut through. So you kind of want to get just that right thickness for the tart crust. And so this is a gluten-free crust because we're using almond flour. There are lots and lots of recipes for tart crusts on the internet or in cookbooks. If you would prefer to make yours with another kind of flour, you can basically follow the same recipe but just make the tart crust different. Okay, so we're getting there. I think I'm just going to have to steal some of the dough from a thick part to put on some of the edges. It's kind of thick in some places. So I'm just trying to make it, doesn't have to go all the way up the edges of the tart pan, because our filling is just going to be almond, apricot jam and peach slices, and then a little streusel topping. So it's not like a big cream pie or anything where you have a lot of filling. Okay, so I think this is ready to pre-bake. Some tarts don't need to be pre-baked, but I think in order to make sure that this doesn't get soggy when it's finished, we don't want it to be soggy, I'm going to pre-bake it for about 8 to 10 minutes in a 375 degree oven. Trying to get this a little bit more even, but it's taking a while. Okay, so it's going to be a little uneven, but that makes it look homemade. Okay, put it in the oven for about 8 to 10 minutes. And next we'll make our topping. So while the tart crust is baking for about 8 minutes, we can put together our topping and slice the peaches. So got some more coconut sugar, about a 1/4 cup. You could do less sugar if you want to cut back on the sugar, but this makes a total of a 1/2 cup of coconut sugar in the entire recipe. And then I've got 2 tablespoons of rice flour. You could try tapioca starch flour or tapioca starch if you want to make it grain-free. And then I'm going to use a little butter here because I like the creamy flavor of that in the topping, but you could also use a vegan butter or coconut oil like we did in the crust. And just make sure it's softened a little bit. And then something I'm trying that's new is a little bit of almond extract. So I've got just like a 1/2 teaspoon of almond extract. And then I'm just going to combine these so there would be like a crumbly crumb mixture. So it's not going to be smooth like that cookie batter for the tart dough, because this is just going to be crumbled on top of the peaches. Okay. So we'll put that to the side. And then I've got a bunch of peaches. A couple of them had spots on them, so I cut those out. I'm going to try to use the nicest looking peaches that I have. Make sure when you're at the store that you get peaches that smell good. You know, when you go by the display, you can actually smell the peaches, and that they're not rock hard when you buy them, because that means they're probably not going to ripen very well. Let's see, some peaches really cling hard, like this one, to the pit, and I might really struggle to get pretty slices. Usually I can just kind of cut it in half, but this one I'm going to have to slice each slice individually, I think. So you want these anywhere from maybe a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. I think the last time I made this they were thinner, but it just kind of depends on how juicy you want the tart to be. So I'm just slicing these in crescent moons and trying to get them off the pit. So I could just slice it all at once. That one's not gonna make it. And then as you're arranging them on the tart, you can kind of reserve the smallest pieces, if you have any that are a little smaller, for the center of the tart. So we're going to be placing those in kind of concentric circles, so that one worked better. And I'm leaving the skin on because I think that it's very, very pretty, instead of going through the hassle of peeling it, and then you wouldn't have the range of colors if you were to peel it. Oops. I'll keep going with this one. So we were able to get one batch of Texas peaches this summer, and I think these are coming from somewhere else, but they were organic and, you know, seemed to be a little bit riper than some other ones we've gotten. I remember when I was growing up, our next door neighbors had, and maybe one of my next door neighbors is watching, they had peach trees in their yard, and I think it might have only been one time that they had this amazing peach harvest, because you have to take care of those trees and make sure that, you know, they're fertilized and watered at the right times and protected in the winter, and the fruit is kind of protected from getting eaten by the birds, and all of that. Fruit is hard to grow and expensive to grow. But so one summer in particular, I remember they invited us over to pick peaches, and we just got bags and bags of fresh, ripe peaches. And I'll never forget that. It was amazing. And I'm sure that we froze some and made peach preserves out of the rest. So I don't know, Mom, if you're watching, do you remember that? Okay. So I'm just going to save these. Very gently put them in here. And we'll be using them soon, so you don't have to worry about them turning brown, I hope. And there is the crust. I'm going to go get that. Okay, so this is our pre-baked crust, and let's see. I put it on a sheet pan because as it bakes, or as we add more things to the tart, as we fill the tart, it's going to get clumsy to carry to back and forth from the oven. And if you keep it on the sheet pan, you'll be sure not to disrupt the tart, you know, because it has the removable bottom. So here's my apricot preserves. You could probably use some other kind of preserves, but apricot preserves has a really nice flavor, but somehow it goes really well with peaches, and it doesn't compete with the flavor of the peaches. So I put about 3 tablespoons. 2 to 3 tablespoons will work. And this just also is like a little bit of a base for the tart, for the peaches to cling to or stick to. I thought my daughter was going to come down and help me with this part, but she's found something to be occupied with today. So I'm going to just lay these down in the tart pan in concentric circles. So I'm sure you could think of different creative designs, but typically this type of tart is kind of these concentric circles. This does go faster if you have a helper. So when I was doing the apple tart recipe for my blog, Izzy was helping me with that one, and it was literally twice as fast. So I think the thing I want to tackle next, dessert-wise, is a fig tart with a creamy layer on the bottom. That's maybe going to be a cashew coconut filling or something. I'm not a huge dessert maker, so these desserts are stretching my, or they're, what do you call it? Expanding my horizons. Oh, I hope I have enough peaches. If not, I will cut up one more. So I used 3 peaches, but it also depends on how closely together you line the peaches up. And then in the center, you can start another row. Ooh, it's getting close. It's getting so close. Oh my goodness. This is suspenseful. So in the Cooking Together subscription that we started earlier this spring, April 19th is when it launched, and once in a while we do a dessert recipe in there to keep things fun and interesting. We mainly do dinner entrees, things that you can serve for your evening meal with your family or yourself. But then I do an extra tip each week that's either a snack or a dessert recipe or a health and wellness tip. And so one time we did an espresso panna cotta that was a dairy-free dessert. And then another time we did easy vanilla chia seed pudding, which we ended up really enjoying here at the house during the cool weather. Got a call. And so anyway, I know there are a few other desserts in there, healthy snacks that we've done, but those are the ones that I remember. And now, I think because it's so hot out today, this didn't stay as crumbs. It kind of turned into a little bit more of a goo. But what you want to do with your topping is kind of evenly spread it over the peaches. And so in the Cooking Together subscription, we've had a different theme every month. And we started with one pot meals. So everybody was adjusting to the stay-at-home orders, and you know, I wanted to have recipes and meals that were easy to make with things that you would probably already have on hand, that you wouldn't have to go out and get special ingredients for. And in general, that's what I really try to do in my recipes. Not too many exotic ingredients. But after the one pot meals, we did a month of Latin American favorites, food from the Caribbean, from Mexico, and a dish from Costa Rica. And then we did, June was healthy French cooking, where we had really, really fresh garden produce that we made into French meals. And then now we're in July, and we're doing Asian cooking, kind of an intro to Asian cooking. So we did, what was the first one we did? Do you remember, Nelson? It was our first. Sushi. Oh yeah, we did sushi. And I forgot to wear my Japanese outfit for my sushi video. I don't know, I forgot. So I have to do it again another time. So I'm going to cover the edges of this tart with foil. And that way the edges of the tart won't burn. I turned the oven up to 400, 375 to 400. It really depends on your oven and if it runs hot, or, you know, definitely learned over the years that different ovens have different you know, you have to set them differently, but anywhere from 375 to 400. And we're gonna watch to make sure that it's not burning, but you wanna leave it in for 30 to 35 minutes, and you should be able to see the topping melting into the peaches, and it's gonna start to bubble and it'll flatten down a little bit. And so we'll check on it in about 30 minutes. Maybe we'll check about halfway through. And so I'm gonna put this in the oven, and then I'm gonna bring you a swapped out one that I already made so that we won't have to stand here for 30 minutes. So
it's done.
okay. Say hi, Iz.
Hello.
You
This
that
is
out of the
my
way?
coffee.
Want to tell them about your coffee? Izzy?
Yeah, it's just whipped coffee, whatever it's called, Dalagonia or something.
But how did you make it?
It's just instant coffee, hot water, then you whisk it together. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the one that I had baked before, and I'm gonna, so it's partially cooled. I'm gonna take it out of the pan here, and Izzy, let's put it on our cake stand. Of course, if you're gonna need to slice this, you probably wanna do it on a cutting board, but it looks so nice on a cake stand. So when I first took the tart out of the oven, it was very, very juicy, and I wondered if it was going to firm up, but it actually did. So don't worry. Should I put this in the center more?
Yeah.
So don't worry if you take your tart out of the oven and it looks too juicy, it's probably gonna firm up. But I did change the recipe just a little bit to have a little bit more flour in the filling. The other thing is, the first time I made this tart last week, I didn't realize it, but until I made it with the coconut sugar today. Okay, I can't hear with that stirring. So I made it with this organic cane sugar, which is a lighter color than the coconut sugar. And this time I made it with the dark coconut sugar. So if you want to have a more transparent topping instead of the darker topping, you can use a different kind of sugar. But anyway, it looks kind of nice with the peaches. And so another thing that you might want to do is make a whipped topping. I would have showed you how to do this if I had known it was actually going to work. But what you need to do if you want to make a coconut whipped cream, which is what this is refrigerate your can of coconut milk, or take out the top cream part. It's about the top third of the coconut milk. And then refrigerate that for a little while, maybe for a few hours or overnight. And then you can whip it up like you would normally whip up regular whipped cream or regular heavy cream. And so this is just plain coconut milk, the cream part on the top, that is whipped up with no added sugar or anything, because the tart is plenty sweet. So I hope you enjoy making your own peach tart. Let me know how it goes. Maybe you can post a picture below the video and share so that we can kind of get inspired by what you created also. So have a great week. We'll see you here next week with another summer recipe. We'll probably be doing a kind of lunchtime recipe next week. So look forward to seeing you then. Take care.
Peace.